about Watson Assistant and Watson Discovery. Ball's in your court, guys. I am going to turn off my camera and hand it to you.
All right, thanks, Don, and good morning, everybody. My name is Zach Myrick, and I'm a technical specialist for the Watson AI portfolio at IBM. And today we'll be showcasing our AI technology through the context of what we call customer self-service. As you will, we're currently living in unprecedented times, and with so many changes going on in business, one of the changes that we are seeing is that there's an increase in customer traffic and spending online. And that primarily has to do with things like social distancing, having to quarantine at home, things of that nature. But that does provide us with an opportunity to better serve our customers through digital channels. So that'll be the focus for today's content. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started so that we can stay on schedule. And then we'll take on any questions that you have at the end. So what we have here, this is our Watson Assistant service that is embedded on top of a fictional retail site called CityCool. And we can simply start the service by clicking this blue button here in the bottom right corner. And so when the assistant begins, it'll send you a greeting message, and it'll also offer you several different hot buttons as topics that you can use to get started. These are common use cases that we have built in. Or if you know exactly what it is that you'd like to say, you can simply enter the text here at the bottom. So I'll start off with a few examples. I'll start by asking, what are your hours? Okay. So from the assistant side, what's happening is that it's using natural language processing to break down the user input and match that with an intent so it's able to display the appropriate output. You won't always have the particular verbiage built into the assistant that the user may say. So you can always reword things a little bit differently, right? I could also say, what are your hours? Okay. Or excuse me, when are you open? Okay. So even though this is worded differently, it's the same intent, and the assistant is able to recognize that, like I said, using natural language processing, and then it's able to route the user to the appropriate dialogue for that. Even though that the phrase is worded differently, it's still asking about store hours, right? Let's take a look at another example. I may ask something a little more vague, like, with so many changes going on, what has changed in your stores, right? That's a little more vague. Is that referring to store hours, store policies, store procedures? So Assistant recognizes that this is a bit vague, and it uses a feature called disambiguation to help clarify what the user is saying. So it offers you a response by saying, I can help you with visit preparedness or preventative measures, right? And so by doing that, it allows us to give the assistant a chance to output the appropriate dialogue. Another question I may want to ask, this is a more common question dealing with customers, right? What is my order status, right? So this time, before displaying the appropriate output, it's going to ask us for some additional information from the user. So what is your order number? So I'm going to type that in, 975-318-642, okay? And then it's also going to ask me for my zip code, 76543. So this is a feature called slats. Slats essentially has to require more information from the user, and it's going to save those as variables to carry out this workflow. Okay, so now that I entered the order number and the zip code, it says, okay, hey, your order is currently in progress for store pickup. And then it also asks me, would I like to make any changes to my order? So it provides me with several different options in this drop down. And I can select, okay, I want to do a home delivery, maybe I want to do a store pickup or a curbside pickup, or as well as some other options. And so as the user, after looking at these different options that are available to me, I may want to decide to do store pickup, but before committing to that option, I may just be curious. Now I may want to ask something like, how do I pick up my order? Okay, so before answering this question, we ask a question unrelated to this workflow. And so it details to us, okay, this is how you pick up your order. And also, would you like us to send you a policy link to your phone? And for this case, we'll just go ahead and say no. And then after I selected no to that question, it then brought us back to where we left off as to, would you like to make a change to your order? So this is an example of a feature we call digression, right? So when you're in a workflow, right, we asked about our order status, and then it asked us if we want to make any changes to that order. I then asked a question that wasn't really related to that workflow, and then it answered that, and then brought us back to where we left off. And this is really useful from a customer standpoint, right? Because they don't have to repeat themselves. And by doing that, goes a long way in ensuring customer satisfaction. So as a user, okay, this is my order status in progress. I know how to pick up my order now that I asked about it. I may want to go ahead and proceed with doing the store pickup. Now, another AI feature that's pretty cool here is that when we entered our order information, right, it saved our zip code, and it used that zip code to locate several different stores within a certain radius of that zip code that we entered previously. So it saved that, and as a user, I can say, okay, hey, based on my address or how far I feel like going, I can pick a store that is within a radius of that zip code. And let's just say for, I'll go ahead and pick the West Pleasant Ridge Road address. And then the assistant is able to carry out that change for us, right? So another example, let's say, okay, we've already asked about our order. We've already scheduled it for store pickup. Let's say now I want to ask about my loyalty status or loyalty points, right? So I can ask, what is my loyalty status? So for this example, this is going to require an authentication first before I can display that information to us. And the system recognizes that. So what we need to do is we'll need to go ahead and sign in first. And here I can simply enter my email address and then type in my password and then log in. Okay, so that password is incorrect. What I can do here is actually I can call into Assistant to get assistance to help reset my password. So I can simply say, I need to reset my password. And again, there's multiple ways you can do this, but for the sake of this demo, we just make the process pretty straightforward. So then it asks for what is my email, msmith@example.com. Okay, and then Assistant is able to provide us with a new password for us. So now that I have that, I can go ahead and sign back in with the new password that the Assistant just generated for us. Type that in, and then, let's see here. Let's give it a second. Okay, so now we've got the authentication going forward. It says welcome Mark. So now that we're logged in, I can go back into the Assistant and say, okay, let's try this again. Ask about our loyalty status. And then the Assistant is able to recognize, okay, he's logged in now. It'll now say, okay, welcome Mark, you currently have 157 points available. So far, we've talked about disambiguation. We've talked about digressions. We asked about order status. We asked about loyalty points. Let's just say, due to the current climate, I may want to ask a question about COVID, right? So I may just want to ask, how reliable are COVID tests? Okay, so unlike the previous questions, this is what we call a long tail question. And this requires a little bit of more research and information before we can display that back to the user. So this isn't like a quick FAQ or quick Q&A. With the long tail question, Watson Assistant will call into our Watson Discovery service, which is essentially our AI-powered search engine that is able to query and ingest structured and unstructured data and make that accessible for the user. So when I ask about, how reliable are COVID tests, the Assistant uses this search skill to call into Discovery to retrieve relevant information to the question that was asked. So as the user, I can go through these passages or documents, and once I've done that, okay, I understand that the COVID tests are reliable. Now, let's say I want to go ahead and schedule an appointment. So I say I want to schedule an appointment for COVID test tomorrow at noon, okay? So this to us is like, right, it's a simple sentence, but again, from the Assistant side, what's happening is it's using natural language processing to break this down and capture relevant information, right? The what, the time, and where, right? So after that, the Assistant goes back and checks the schedule and says, okay, unfortunately, the time that you preferred is unavailable. However, these are some alternative times. So as a user, I can go back and check my schedule and say, okay, although I want to do 12, maybe 10:30 will work. And it gives me the option to book that right there. And the Assistant is doing this process and is able to book that appointment for me. And then also, there may be times or scenarios which, regardless of, the intents that you have built into your Assistant, sometimes the user just needs to speak with an agent, right? It could be something complicated or sophisticated, and you could just simply say, I want to speak with an agent. So Watson Assistant does provide out-of-the-box integrations for chat support. And so what's going to happen is it's going to send a request to the live agent through Zendesk. And so we're going to get this request here in the top right corner. And so now I'm currently in the shoes of the agent, and the Watson Assistant and Zendesk are now connected, and now I'm able to converse with the user. So I can say, hi, or hi, my name is Zach. How can I help you? Right? So now if I go back to the Watson Assistant, we can see now I'm now connected with the agent, and the user and the agent cannot converse with each other. I may say something like, I need help with an order, or whatever the case may be. And then now we can see that this conversation is initiated between the user and the agent. One thing to note here is that the chat transcript is also available to the agent as well, so that way he has that context when conversing with the agent. And so this is just a quick summary of some of the AI technologies within our Watson Assistant platform, right? So we talked about quick FAQs and Q&As, right? The user or the phrases don't always have to follow a specific wording. The assistant is able to pick up on those intents as long as they're similar. We've also talked about digressions, right? Sometimes when you're going through a workflow or a complicated workflow, a user may ask questions throughout that workflow that deviate from that. And then once it carries that out, it's able to bring you back to the conversation. We've also talked about search skills, right? Calling on to Discovery for long tail questions that require additional research. And also the live agent support as well. In the event that the user does need to speak with an agent, we also provide that out of the box capability as well. So without further ado, what we'll do next is I'll pass it over to my colleague, Jason DeVoe, who will take you guys behind the covers as to how to configure this assistant, as well as what goes up to setting on the service. So Jason, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks very much, Zach. Appreciate it, and happy to be on today this morning here with you all. My name is Jason DeVoe. I'm a technical specialist in data and AI, specifically working with our consumer and travel market like Zach. But my background is actually with Cognos. I started with Cognos 14 years ago before we were even part of IBM. So user groups like this are very near and dear to my heart. And I think that this conversation is particularly important to folks around Cognos because ultimately the tool is about getting information out there. And what I see is this is where the market's going for how people are going to interact and find the information that they need. And you already start to see pieces of this, like the Cognos assistant that's built into the tool. This is some of the underlying technology that goes into that. And I think you'll hear a little more about where the natural language processing in Cognos directly is going when Jason talks to you later on this afternoon. But in terms of the Watson Assistant itself and expanding outside of Chatbot, you saw a great example from Zach and the different interactions that were there. With chatbots, it can be very frustrating as you go and you ask a question and it directs you someplace else and it's constantly pushing you out to other areas. Watson Assistant has that great capability to interact with other components, systems, backends, whatever you might be. So in the example that Zach had, we had everything from scheduling system, an order management system, resetting passwords, all those within one chatbot interface. Excuse me. And we're even starting to use things like that internally at IBM. Our own team uses it to get the information from various sources around support tickets or product information or connect to offering managers. And we have many other customers using it in different ways too. So how can you get started and start to look at this as well? So anyone that wants to start to get into this space and start using the tool, you can go right into cloud.ibm.com, sign up for an account. And once you create that cloud account, you come in and you see a dashboard similar to this. Lots of buttons, a lot of things to look into, lots of really cool stuff to investigate with. But if you want to really get started quick, you can come right in to create a resource, the big blue button in the upper right. You click that and you'll see the full catalog of services up here on IBM Cloud. Now, there's a number of them in here. Obviously, I spend a lot of time in the analytics space, so you see those tools come up first. But one of the first ones is Watson Assistant here. And if you just want to get started, there's actually a light plan that's associated with this. So you can go in for free, get running, and use most of the major capabilities that are in Watson Assistant. There's some others in there that you won't get into until you get to a higher level account, but certainly a great way to get started and get familiar with the capabilities of the service. So once you do that, once you get started, then what? You come into the view when you open up the tool of Watson Assistant, and you see these number of assistants that are there. So I'm going to take you through each one of the building blocks so you know how to get started. So you can go ahead and create your own assistant. For the purposes of just the time that we have today, I'm going to go in and show you the starting place that I've already started to put together for you. But what an assistant is that linkage between the different capabilities and interactions that you might have. So when you look at the conversational part that happens here, there's a few items. The main one is a dialogue, and that is that conversational flow, the back and forth, the understanding of what you're trying to ask and the response that you get. There's another interaction here, another skill called a search skill. Remember when Zach typed and asked about COVID tests and how reliable they were? They went off to some document repository. That's what the search skill does. It leverages another solution, Watson Discovery, that goes and index documents and makes them searchable. It does a lot more than that. There's a whole conversation we can have around discovery. Won't go into the details, but think of it as understanding free-form documents and allowing you to search and analyze on that information. Excuse me, as well as other interactions. So integrations. So you can put this as a web chat like Zach showed you before, or we can tie into other third-party applications like Slack or Facebook Messenger, phone as well, often used in call centers. A number of integrations, and this list just continues to grow as we move forward with the solution. But let's hop right into the dialogue skill itself. So this is a dialogue that we mentioned before. This is what controls the flow of the conversation. And so as we go into start training this skill on how Watson's going to have this conversation, there's a few concepts to understand first. When a user goes in and starts typing in something, we call that an intent. What we're trying to do is understand from the conversation what the person is trying to accomplish. Are they asking to schedule an appointment, like one of the examples Zach showed, or are they checking on an order status, for example? And it's those intents that drive the actions with Watson Assistant. Now, wanting to do an action, or your perhaps verb, if you want to go to the grammar way of looking at it, is your intents. But then you need to take action on something, typically a little more detail, and that becomes the entities. So the next tab down here are entities. Entities are your specific items that you're going to do action on. So it could be the order number that you're investigating, or if you're trying to schedule an appointment, what are you scheduling an appointment for? The COVID test? Is it some other checkup? Is it the date, the time? Those are the specific entities that go into the actions. Think of them almost as you will the nouns of our sentence that we're creating. And then tying that all together becomes the dialogue. When I know what you're trying to do, this is the response or the action that I take on top of that. So let's go ahead and look at this flow and how we might create one from the ground up here. So first, I would start with intents. I'm going to go ahead and create a new intent by clicking on the button here. I give it a name. So let's say this one is just capabilities. Something pretty simple. What can the bot do? So I'm going to type that in. I can put in a description if I'd want, and then hit the button to add examples. Now here we start to type in example utterances that the user might ask to ask what capabilities you can do. So I might say, what can you do? What questions can you answer? Any other number of things. Typically, the UI here says 5 unique answers. You can get started with 5. Most for implementations, productions, you usually want about 10 examples, but really as few as I've seen, 3 or 4, it will start to understand what you're trying to do. How many questions can you answer? How can you help me? Right? These would be examples. Now, you don't always have to type these in yourself. So you can see there's recommendations. So we can actually input call center dialogue or chat dialogues or FAQs and use this as a starting point to understand the intents that you might have. So let me back up here for a second, excuse me. You can see I also have one in here called car inventory. So this is an example maybe for a car dealership, and someone comes in, they want to ask about cars. And you see there's some samples here, but some of the samples in here have something highlighted. You see it, do you have any BMWs? Do you have any new Subarus? What that is an annotated example. That's an example where I'm asking for something specific. The intent is still to learn about your inventory and what you have in stock. But within that example, there's a specific reference to an entity. And in this case, it might be a BMW or a Subaru. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. In the entities area, this is where I start to put those classifications of items that I might be looking for. This particular one is looking at car models, as I said. So I give it the value or the name that I want for each one, and then synonyms to that. So for example, I have DeLorean, but a synonym for that might be the Back to the Future car or the car that Marty McFly rode, right? So these are other types of ways you might reference it. A Beamer is a slang way of saying some car types, right? So those are all, you can put those synonyms in, and if Watson comes across it, it knows that you're referring to that specific type. We can also look for patterns within the excuse me, sorry for that. We can also look at patterns and trying to detect the entity. This might be something like a regular expression for, say a phone number or an email address or an account number or an order number. That's how you'd be able to get these dynamic patterns from there. Now we've created some entities, we've created some intents. I should also point out there's system entities in here as well. So you saw when Zach asked to schedule an appointment, he said tomorrow. The system knows about dates and time. So when I say noon, the system, Watson knows that noon is 12 o'clock. When I say tomorrow, Watson knows that that's Friday. All right, so these are kind of some built-in intents that are commonly come across. So going back, so now I have my intent set up, I have my entities, I can go ahead and start creating my dialogue. And think of this as a tree structure that we go through. You could have many different steps as we go through and start to put in the response of what we're looking for. So if I want to put in a very basic node, a very basic response, I can say add node in here. I can give it a name, or we'll just use the default here, which will get populated once we put in the clause that this node is looking for. So what this does is it's asking, well, if Watson Assistant recognizes what? Are we looking for a specific intent or an entity or just a variable? Think of this as the if clause, if you will, to determine when you're going to fire this up. So on this one, I want to say intent. When I'm looking for a particular intent, if the customer is asking about capabilities, I want to have this response. And I might type in, and this bot is very basic, so it's not going to do a whole lot in this one. I can tell you about our car inventory, right? So there's a very basic ability in here to just put in the Q&A type of questions. If I find an intent, here's a response. We can get more sophisticated with those responses as well, where we might give back, rather than just text, option buttons or images, or send them off to connect to an agent. Zach showed you that integration with Zendesk before, or to send the question off to a search skill. So if it's something a little more robust, or if somebody asks to search the knowledge base, I can take that and send it to Discovery to search our document repository that we have captured in there as well. Okay, so all kinds of different responses there. We can get further, more sophisticated even with that. And Zach in his demo showed you a couple concepts of things called slots and the ability to interact with backend integration systems. So we'll show you that here as well. So in the car inventory node, this time if somebody asks and said, I want to know how many cars you have, well, I need to know what type of car you're asking about. That's where the BMW or the Subaru or one of those examples come in. Excuse me. So on this node, there's an area here that says customize, and I can turn on slots. And what slots does is it then gives you this part of the dialogue that lets you check for certain variables or certain entities that exist. So what I'm doing now is I'm telling, by you leveraging the slots capability, Watson will check the utterance that came in from the user looking for that specific entity, in this case, the car model. If it doesn't find one in the utterance from the user, it will prompt the user for what type of car are you looking for. So we'll give them that question back. So it's smart enough to know, like in Zach's example, when he said, I want to schedule an appointment for a COVID test, it could pull all that information, as well as the date and the time, out of that single utterance. And if any of that individual information was missing, it would just ask the user to fill that in. We'll show you an example of that in a second. Excuse me. Now, the other option here is obviously Watson Assistant itself, as a conversational engine here, is not specifically going to know what the car inventory is. That's going to be kept in some other system, much like when Zach asked about the order status in his demo. So we're going to call out to another service to get that information. And we do that through a concept called webhooks. And essentially a webhook is a call out to a REST endpoint. In this case, we're leveraging a capability on IBM serverless compute called Cloud Functions. And we're calling out to this REST endpoint asking to run the car inventory action and passing with it what model of car that we're looking for. And we'll take that response and show it back here. Now, with all these options in place, as I've typed in and been making changes to the model, Watson's actually changing on that, understanding the intents and the entity patterns that I have, and training a model to be able to handle a natural language conversation. So if I come right within the UI, I can try it out. And in this one, I can say, what can you do? Right? And I can tell you about car inventory. We just trained it and already it's up and pulling that out. I could say, how many trucks do you have? And you notice, I didn't spend a lot of time on it before, but in the intents before, I never put in an example that talked about trucks. But because of the natural language processing that's here and the smarts built into Watson, it knows trucks is most closely related to automobiles. It's a pretty high confidence score that I'm asking for that particular intent looking at inventory. And you see in this case, I didn't put in a specific model or anything like that. So it's saying what kind of car or truck are you looking for? So I can say F-150, for example, and it says we're out of stock of F-150. All right, but if I clear this up, let's ask something else. I want to buy a Subaru. Now, in this case, it didn't ask me what model car. This is the power of slots and building a very powerful interface for users. It didn't have to ask me again. It has that ability to pick that up and then question the backend system to find out what that inventory is. So very quickly, you can start tying into backend systems, integrating with other systems, and building a dialogue flow to do any number of things within the organization. Now, over time, you're certainly not going to want to use it in this interface, but it's very easy to pick this up and drop it into another application. So if I come back to our view of our assistants, you'll notice that in our building conversation assistant here, one of the integrations I have is a web chat. And it shows you what that would look like over here. You can customize some of the UI. And then when it's ready and you want to embed it into an application, that's the only piece of code that you need to do, just drop that onto a web page. So our example here is I've actually taken that snippet of code, put it on just a very basic HTML page. So I can come in and start chatting with it and asking things like, what can you do? And those changes are immediately available within this interface. I want a car. What type of car? Like in Back to the Future. And if you remember the synonyms here, I'm showing you a different example, and it knows to pull out that Back to the Future, and I'm asking about a DeLorean. And it says that takes me back in time, but we're out of those. So again, that's just a high-level tour. We didn't have a ton of time to go through all the capabilities that are in here, but you can certainly get started, start kicking the tires on it. There's a number of great tutorials and articles out there with samples that you can do with Watson Assistant. So I encourage you to start picking it up, taking a look at it. And as I said, I think there might be some similar capabilities coming down the road that you'll hear about from Jason Tavolaris later on when he goes into the roadmap. So with that, team, I think we wanted to open it up for some questions. So we'll leave the last 5 minutes here for any questions that we have out there.
Yeah, so let me ask a quick question. This is Don for you, Jason. The Watson Assistant that you're talking about here, how is this different than the Watson Assistant that's in Cognos? Because that uses natural language as well.
Exactly. And so the Watson Assistant, or the assistant, the Cognos Assistant is the branding right now, that's in Cognos is specifically intended for Cognos information. There's BI intents and understanding that's in there. And so when you're asking for data and information, it's using a similar natural engine processing underneath to determine whether you're asking about data or you want to build a dashboard and then pulling out the relevant entities to build that information. But it's all fixed around BI. And today it's just for BI. Watson Assistant is a broader platform, right, that allows you to go through and, as we showed, integrate with a number of other applications. But I think you're going to see that coming closer over the upcoming years. So.
Great, thanks.
Hope that answered, Don. Anything else?
Yeah, another question that came up was you're showing this is all around chat, but can this be used on voice as well, like phone calls and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of customers, particularly in my space, working with consumer and travel, a number of customers that use it in the call center. And it's actually one of the big differentiators for us. So the Watson portfolio of services, and I'm sure everyone's seen the commercials, Watson, it typically is talked about as one thing. It's actually a number of different services around AI capabilities that are packaged and available. So Watson Assistants, what I'm showing you today, that's a conversational platform that's there. But there's Discovery, which we touched upon, and also speech to text and text to speech. And that does not exactly the most creative name, but it does exactly what it says. It converts speech that it hears into text, and then takes text that it gets back and converts it to speech. So we leverage those two services and those two capabilities with Watson Assistant to build a very robust voice interaction conversation bot as well. So all the things like digressions and disambiguation, we can get in a phone experience too. So it's not just a matter of hit number 1 to talk to this rep or number 2 to talk to this department. So those are all services out there you can take a look at and tie together to leverage Watson Assistant, not just as a web chatbot, but through voice too.
I really appreciate that, because I'm the guy who, as soon as I hear press 1 for this, press 2 for that, I'm slamming the phone going, press 0, I want to talk to somebody. I want to ask a real question.
Well, we can handle that handoff too, which is something Zach showed, right? Passing it off to the agent.
Yeah, I know.
So
I know, but if it says what I really love about this IBM product is it says, how can I help you? I'll answer that question. It's not forcing me down a predefined path. We got 2 minutes left, and then we got to move on. So what's next in the Watson Assistant product? Sounds very cool, and I know a lot of clients have been using Watson Assistant to answer, COVID questions. Employees, a lot of clients I know have implemented Watson Assistant because at LPA we can help you implement Watson Assistant. And oh, by the way, this is a few weeks type of project. You showed how simple it is to build this. This is not months-long projects.
Right.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how some folks used it during COVID and how quickly it got up and running.
Yeah, so a few different things. So we've had a number of grocery stores. I think of grocery stores at this time, and they're constantly out of stock of certain materials throughout COVID. Procedures and policies are changing all the time. You had a lot of nervous people asking about what was happening in the stores to keep them safe, and call centers were getting flooded, absolutely flooded and crushed with calls. And a lot of these outsourced those call centers because not a lot of people were calling the grocery stores before, right? So it was a huge cost for them to try and manually handle that with the call center. So we were able, in many instances, get this up and running in under a month to start offloading those questions, those commonly asked questions, the FAQs that came in from customers through the cost for the call centers. And now, as we start to progress, we're seeing a different change. There's a lot of calls going in asking about vaccines, and a number of pharmacy chains, if you will, we're in the process of implementing Watson Assistant to help with the scheduling example that Zach showed you, and implementing some of those things or to answer questions about what the vaccine is. So again, up and running quick projects. I think there's a number of government agencies as well that have done this for the citizens to roll out these assistants and answer COVID questions. So yeah, great point, Don. It rolls out fast, and it was a great thing during, well, what happened last year wasn't great, but it was great that we were able to come in and help many organizations through this time and get solutions out quick.
Jason, thank you so much.